There is so much to talk about from last week's Austrian Grand Prix that I thought we absolutely had to take a look back. And that look has to start really with Mercedes. They were the favourites going into the race and they won the race, but it wasn't as convincing as we thought it should be. There was a big problem with the transmission on the car. The drivers are being told to stay off the curbs. Now, normally when you hear that, worry about transmission, stay off the curbs, it's to do with a mechanical problem on the gearbox. All the cogs, the hydraulic linkages, and the carbon fibre components in the rear of the car. That wasn't the case for Mercedes. Turns out it was an electrical problem. Somewhere on the wiring loom, and there's two wiring looms on most of these cars, a signal loom and a power loom. That's the electrical loom. In Formula One, they use the word loom for an electrical circuit, essentially. And some of the sensors at the rear of the car, and the rears of these Formula One cars are absolutely packed with electrical sensors. Somewhere in that system, something went wrong, and it was caused by the drivers hitting the curbs really hard. We don't know exactly what, but some of those sensors were out of kilter, and that caused a big issue for the gearbox. I'm not convinced Mercedes has fixed it for the Styrian Grand Prix, and if they haven't, we're going to hear both drivers told to keep off the curbs, and that's what we heard in free practice as well. The next team I want to talk about is Haas. Now, both of its cars retired from the Austrian Grand Prix with brake failure, and it's not the first time we've seen the American-Italian team struggle with its stopping power. The thing about Haas is they get all of their brakes and the whole package come from Ferrari. It's a complete set, as are many parts on that car. However, there was a change at the start of the 2020 season. In previous years, Haas has got its brake ducts from Ferrari, but that's no longer allowed. So in 2020, Haas is using these. It's a variant of the Ferrari 2019 braking system that's been a little bit modified. Now these brakes, this package you see here in free practice in the Styrian Grand Prix, has a different setup on it, and it's actually, it caused a cooling problem, and that caused the right front disc failure on one of the cars and another failure on the other car. Then if you look at the brake package used on the other car, you see it's not got those cooling ducts on it. It's a little bit, it looks like it would have less cooling, but this is the new package that Haas hopes will solve that brake cooling issue. Now, those ducts are purely based on last year's Ferrari, and Ferrari as the works team has gone a completely different direction. They can't share their notes anymore, and will these new brakes work for Haas? We wait and see until the Styrian Grand Prix. And of course, all of that brings us to Ferrari. Ferrari had a very dismal Austrian Grand Prix weekend. Even though Charles Leclerc managed to finish second position, the team went away very downhearted. The team and the car have real problems. The SF1000 isn't on the pace. It's not a front-running car. They were lucky with that podium finish. Now, what is the problem with the car? Well, there are two major areas. First is the power unit. There's not much the team can do about that now because the power unit is homologated. But coming into the 2020 season, Ferrari had to change both the combustion chamber and the overall architecture of the V6 in the back of that car. They said they made those changes to keep up with the rule changes relating to not being allowed to burn oil. The thing is, not burning oil, well, burning oil is against the technical regulations, and that was made clear a couple of seasons back. So if Ferrari had to change their power unit to suit that regulation, it does really raise even more questions about how legal last year's car was. We don't actually know the details of that settlement between the FIA and Ferrari, and I'm guessing we'll probably never find out. However, Ferrari's engines are not on the pace this year, and that does seem to be part of the reason. But it's not the only problem Ferrari have got. They've also got an aerodynamic problem. The car was very difficult to drive in Austria, and quite frankly, we all wondered why. Well, the team told us afterwards they've got a correlation issue, and that means the data they're getting from their wind tunnel and the data they're getting from their CFD, the virtual wind tunnel, and what they're doing on the track aren't coming together and adding up. And that is a major problem for them to fix. Haas have the same issue, and they use the same wind tunnel. So I think that's where Ferrari's real problems lie. And that's not going to be an easy fix. But they came with some new parts to the track at Styria. So this is the part they started off the race weekend with in free practice 1. So they had that squared off front wing end plate and these upper elements. I'm just putting those there so you can take a look at them. But this is the new package with a horseshoe end plate foot and then these new upper elements on the front wing. They're far more curvaceous, if you like, and they are far more complex. And this is a product of the same wind tunnel and CFD process, but it doesn't seem to have solved the problem. The floor too has changed, so these longitudinal strakes along the side of the car have been replaced by these little cutouts along the rear of the floor, all to do with the rear tyre wake and getting the best out of that and getting the most out of the diffuser. Sebastian Vettel, He really put it to the test by clouting that new front wing into the curb and the rear floor as well. And the mechanics were definitely not happy about that. As soon as the car came into the pits, they dived in, took a look at the rear floor and really wanted to make sure he hadn't broken it. And then at the front wing, it was the same story. Only one of these front wings available, I think, and the mechanics really wanted to make sure Vettel hadn't damaged it. However, that was such a heavy hit into the curb, I wouldn't be too surprised to see them have a failure in the Styrian Grand Prix on Sunday. Taking a look at the cars today in free practice, there was a lot to talk about. And the first car I'd want to take a look at is the one that's quite often at the back of the field. Well, it wasn't in free practice at the Styrian Grand Prix. It was actually quite competitive. It was faster than the Haas and it was a match for the Alfa Romeo. And it is, of course, the Williams. Well, Williams have been working really hard to get their car, well, working properly, which it hasn't been for a while. And the first big change that I noticed was, well, take a look at this rear wing. This is the rear wing they used at the Austrian Grand Prix last week, but they also ran in free practice this new wing, which has got a completely different centre section. It's much more kicks up between those two rear wing supports. And have a look at the T-wing section, because that's something else they experimented with during free practice. They ran this completely different, well, U-shaped T-wing with a third element in the middle. And that's a really different approach from the team. That shows where their focus is. But the focuses on the car were not just at the rear. Last week, they were also playing around with the front suspension. Now, you see that element going up that leads to the upper wishbone. Massive structural challenge to build one of those. And Williams tried around with two different configurations of that last week. To change something like that is a major mechanical issue, and I think it was more than just a little bit of a change of a shroud. Williams really have gone to town on the front of this car. Has it worked, though? Well, it seems to have done. The car's relative performance has improved this week. So Williams may be finally finding the direction to move in, and that bodes well for the rest of the year. Back up at the front of the grid, the development race is absolutely fever pitch, and Red Bull brought along some new rear-end components. The car has looked a little bit difficult to drive. Well, look at the rear wing end plate here. It's quite angular, quite basic though. Well, here for the Styrian Grand Prix, Red Bull have brought on a far more complex component with all of these new vents and completely different strakes along the side. Will it make a difference to the car? Well, it still looked very, very difficult to drive in free practice, as Alex Albon very much demonstrated with quite a hairy spin, but Max Verstappen didn't fare much better, and he was struggling too, though Verstappen was using the old news that Albon had last week, and Albon had the new one. Not quite clear which one's quicker, but Verstappen was quicker on track in both configurations. Now, one bit I really was interested in when I saw her on the car. Now, McLaren didn't run this in the semi-competitive Free Practice 2 session, but they did have it on the car in Free Practice 1, and it absolutely wasn't on the car at the Austrian Grand Prix last week. It's this little... It's just at the tail of the rear bodywork, and it's a little winglet or flow conditioner just dealing with the flow at the rear of the car. I've not really seen much like it from McLaren before, and it's an interesting thing from a legality standpoint because you have this single and continuous rule when it comes to bodywork, and that doesn't look single or continuous to me. However, it might just come within that wing, the T-wing sort of legality box at the back of the car, and I think that's what McLaren are using. You can see it there quite clearly on the back of Carlos Sainz's car, but as the cars came out, it was only on his car in practice. Lando Norris, as you see, coming past us, we'll see that he didn't have it on the rear of his car. There he is, completely nice, clean rear bodywork. Did it make a great difference to either car? Well, they didn't run it in the fast session. Is it going to make a big difference, or is it just a hint of something more to come from McLaren?